One of the biggest international stories this week has been Russia's Wagner mercenary group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's plane crash that was reported this Wednesday, following which he is now presumed dead. This came barely 2 months after Prigozhin, once one of President Putin's closest allies and known as Putin's chef, mounted a coup against the Putin administration and the military in an event that sent shockwaves not just through Russia but in fact across the world. Even though the coup failed, Prigozhin and his Wagner forces turned back, halting their march on Moscow. Subsequently, Putin and Prigozhin met at the Kremlin just days later, and Prigozhin was granted immunity from prosecution and asked to relocate to Belarus, or so we are told. One thing was crystal clear to most Russia and Putin watchers, that Prigozhin was now a dead man walking, and that the day he decided to mount what's been described as the biggest and most humiliating challenge to Putin's authority in his 25-year reign, the Wagner boss had signed his own death warrant. Most believed his days were numbered. US President Joe Biden had quipped, "If I were Prigozhin, I would not fire my food taster." Some others said Prigozhin should be very careful near windows. The American spy agency CIA chief William Burns had said, "Putin is the ultimate apostle of payback, and he believes revenge is a dish best served cold." All references to the fate that most of Putin's enemies, political opponents and critics have met with over the years. Therefore, the moment news of Prigozhin's plane crash came in, a majority of people said, "We told you so. This was only a matter of time." Now the Kremlin has issued a formal statement rejecting allegations that it was behind the plane crash that is presumed to have killed the mercenary leader. The Kremlin statement says, "Of course, in the West, those speculations are put out under a certain angle, and all of it is a complete lie." Prigozhin, who was listed amongst those on board that plane, was in fact praised by Putin, even as suspicions grew that the Russian president may have been behind the Wednesday crash that many in fact saw as an assassination. A preliminary US intelligence assessment concluded that the plane was downed by an intentional explosion. One of the US and Western officials who described the initial US assessment said it determined that Prigozhin was very likely targeted and that the explosion falls in line with Putin's long history of trying to silence his critics. Britain's defense ministry has said the presumed death of the Russian mercenary leader could destabilize the Wagner group. President Biden reacted by saying, "I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised. There's not much that happens in Russia that Putin is not behind." Interestingly, in his first comments on the plane crash, Putin recalled that he had known Prigozhin since the early 1990s. And guess what? He described him as a man of difficult fate who had made serious mistakes in life and achieved the results that he needed both for himself and, quote, "when I asked him about it, for the common cause, as in these last few months, he was a talented man, a talented businessman." That is what Putin had said.
In regard to this plane crash, I would like, first of all, to present words of sincere condolences to the families of all those who died. It is always a tragedy. We have nothing to do with this situation, that's for sure. I think everyone knows who this concerns.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you think Putin was responsible?
There's not much that happens when Russia and Putin not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
Okay, let's go back to Shri in Washington, D.C. for more on this story. Shri, a lot of people had said, we know how this story ends. And 2 months after the aborted coup, they're saying, we told you so. And here's Putin, who's offering condolences to Wagner boss's family and his forces. He says he was a very talented man, but one who made many mistakes in his life. And now you have a situation where the Kremlin has to actually come out and issue a statement saying we did not kill Prigozhin. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think Mr. Putin has said it himself. Prigozhin is a man who made many mistakes. I think the biggest and the most fatal was rebelling against Mr. Putin. So Neha, I personally am inclined to go with the U.S. intelligence's unofficial conclusion on what happened. So they have concluded that it was an internal intentional explosion that downed the private plane, and there was no ground to air missile which struck the plane down. The reason why I would like to go with this assessment is also because a lot of reports which have been coming out since the plane went down, for example, the eyewitness accounts from the site where the plane went down, their eyewitnesses have said that they saw an explosion, that the plane exploded before it started falling out of the sky. Now, then we also have the report from the stewardess, who was the only stewardess who was on the plane, the female stewardess who was on the plane, Christina, who sent a message to her family saying that there's been an unscheduled repair check which has delayed a takeoff. Now, there is some speculation that maybe a bomb was planted in a very expensive wine crate on board, and that may be the reason why there was a delay, the so-called repairs that happened. Of course, I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to conclusively prove this, given that no one will have access to the crash site since it happened within Russia. But I think it's fair enough to say that everyone pretty much agrees what happened, even if they're not willing to say it in so many words, Neha. So I think it's a price Prigozhin paid for going against Mr. Putin. I think that's a fair summary of his unfortunate and tragic story.
I think it would be safe to say, Sri, that this is a movie we've all seen before. And as many wise men and women have pointed out in the last couple of days, if you do decide to take on Vladimir Putin, do so at your own peril.